This podcast is brought to you by Proton Dealership IT, experts in dealership cybersecurity and IT management. Interested in a free cybersecurity, compliance, or IT consultation? Visit protontex.com. That's PROTONTECHS.com.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Monday, September 29th, 2025. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, JLR begins to start production back up after its cyber attack. The parent of a couple of major auto suppliers files for bankruptcy, and EVs are expected to buoy third quarter sales results. Plus, we'll hear from a panel of experts about how resilient the U.S. auto market has been so far in 2025.
I've been saying all year long, it sucks to be a manufacturer. And it also this year sucks to be an economist.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. Jaguar Land Rover says it will restart some of its manufacturing operations in the coming days. That's as the automaker begins a phased recovery following a cyber attack earlier this month. The announcement comes after the UK government agreed to back JLR with a $2 billion loan guarantee to help support its supply chain in the wake of the production shutdown after the attack. On top of that, JLR is also trying to raise a $2.7 billion loan from global banks. The move is expected to show JLR has liquidity to tide over revenue losses. U.S. supplier First Brands has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The parent of auto suppliers Trico and Fram is burdened by heavy debt from a flurry of acquisitions and stressed finances. First Brands said in a statement that it has obtained $1.1 billion in debtor-in-possession financing from its first lien lenders to support ongoing operations. And General Motors plans to reopen the engineering center at its Warren Technical Campus near Detroit. That's after full remediation of water systems in the building where the bacteria that causes Legionnaire's disease was recently discovered. The automaker said employees can return to the Cole Engineering Center on October 1st. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. In a minute, we'll hear from experts about how resilient the U.S. auto market has been so far this year. Our own Lindsay Van Hully moderated that panel at Automotive News Congress in Detroit and has a story today about what we expect to see from third quarter sales results this week. She joins me now to talk about it. Lindsay, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Hi, Kel. Happy to be here.
So, Lindsay, you wrote that EV sales are probably going to buoy third quarter U.S. sales. I assume that's because of this rush to buy EVs before the federal tax credit goes away after tomorrow.
That's a big part of it. Talking with analysts ahead of the third quarter sales results this week, that's one thing they all pointed to, really a surge of interest in EVs before the end of the tax credit on September 30th. You know, that $7,500 federal credit has helped support, purchases and leases of new EVs. And a lot of analysts are expecting that is going to result in record market share for EVs in the third quarter.
And how do those results help set the stage for what we're about to hear from your Automotive News Congress panel about what experts have been seeing?
When we were on stage at Automotive News Congress this month, the first question really I wanted to ask was just, where is the market right now? How is demand holding up and what's it looking like? And really the consensus was it's been a pretty resilient consumer. There's been a lot of momentum in the market. A lot of consumers are still looking to buy. There was a point made about, for a lot of the time, there was this thought that, prices were going to go up, maybe they'd be lower in the future. And now there's this sense that, prices are going to go up. And so now might be the time to buy. I think people are concerned about, the impact of tariff pricing and costs that are going to be eventually passed down. Analysts and economists on stage talked about, we haven't really seen that yet, I think, to the degree that many people had predicted earlier this year. But the question is, does that ultimately happen and when? And so that sort of led to consumers thinking, if prices go up, now might be the time to buy. And that might be one reason why we've seen a pretty resilient market so far this year.
And what are experts expecting for the rest of the year?
It's looking like the fourth quarter is going to be a little softer, especially when it comes to EVs. I think there's really no question among anyone out there that if the tax credit goes away, there's going to be an impact on fourth quarter EV sales in particular. I don't think anybody knows the degree to that yet. There's been a lot of discussion about, we're going to see what natural EV demand settles out once that incentive is gone. We don't know necessarily, what other automaker incentives might come in to offset that or to mitigate that. But it seems pretty likely to analysts that we're going to see a softer fourth quarter. Overall, though, they're still expecting a pretty solid year. I think even if the fourth quarter is down a little, that the first three were pretty strong. So, I think that's what everyone's going to be watching really, is what happens with EV demand once that credit goes away.
Perfect. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Cal.
Coming up, Lindsay speaks with experts about how tariffs, the end of EV tax credits, and other factors have tested the U.S. auto market's resilience so far this year. That's next on Daily Drive.
Automotive News Shift podcast brings you the latest on automotive technology, trends, and transformation. I'm Hannah Lutz.
And I'm Molly Boygon. We're the new co-hosts of Shift, and we're excited to bring you new conversations with experts and industry insiders like this one with Larry Dominique, president of LD Management Consulting.
I do believe the legacy OEMs are falling into a trap. They've got to find a way to, in some ways, build a new airplane while they're still in flight.
Catch Shift, available every Sunday, wherever you get your podcasts.
While you provide top-notch support to your team and customers every day, is anyone taking the time to ensure your sensitive data remains secure? Just one click on a malicious link can place your entire dealership in danger. In fact, the average cost of a data breach surpassed $4 million last year. Stay one step ahead by understanding the threats and minimizing your risk. Proton Dealership IT works around the clock to provide you with support 24/7, 365. Operating out of a cutting-edge security operations center located in the USA, Proton continuously monitors, detects, and responds to your potential network issues or cyber threats. You've got a lot on your plate. Keep your focus on where it matters most, your customers. We'll handle the cyber support. Learn more about our comprehensive services at protontex.com. That's PROTONTECHS.com.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. Economists say the U.S. light vehicle market has been resilient this year, but they expect tariffs, expiring EV tax credits, and other factors to hamper affordability in the coming months. Our own Lindsay Van Hully spoke with experts about all of it during a panel at Automotive News Congress in Detroit this month. Jessica Caldwell is Associate Vice President and Head of Insights at Edmunds. Emily Kalinsky-Morris is Chief Economist at Ford, and Jonathan Smoke is Chief Economist at Cox Automotive. Here's a piece of their conversation.
To start, I would love to just sort of set the scene and, how is the new vehicle market looking right now? Through the first half of the year, now that the third quarter is coming to a close. Jonathan, we've recently gotten some August sales numbers. What has the summer looked like from a demand perspective?
The summer has been strong, really defying a lot of odds and expectations that we would be seeing a slowing this year. And I think it's a reflection of multiple things. One, I think what David was saying earlier, the manufacturers have not been quick to make snap judgments about raising prices, changing production and deliveries. So the market has been relatively consistent rather than declining from a supply perspective. And pricing has not turned negative. And I think what's underlying this strength is really a substantial amount of pent-up demand from vehicles that were not sold, new or used, over the last 4 years. And you combine that with the psychology of the buyer, be it a consumer or a fleet customer. We've been living in a world for 4 years that the expectation was a vehicle will be cheaper in the future because we'd gone through the inflation of the supply chain crisis. We were in a world where everybody was convinced interest rates would be much lower in the future than what we were dealing with. And I think this year with tariffs, the psychology has flipped to a perspective of no, prices will be higher in the future and we can no longer bet on interest rates being better. So this summer, if you think about people buying vehicles, the deals that consumers and fleet buyers have been seeing this summer probably represent what they believe is the best deal they're going to see for some time. And I think it explains some of the urgency and strength that we're seeing in the market. And in our data that we follow weekly, we have yet to see a shift in that pace. August continued to be very strong until the very end, and September is starting well as well. Of course, we've got the little EV piece that's part of that excitement too, which I know we'll get into, but it's certainly a scenario where the vehicle market is holding up and really is a really important part of the macro discussion too, because we wouldn't be seeing the economy drive off a cliff if the vehicle market is staying as strong as it is. So it makes me more optimistic rather than pessimistic.
It was just the fact that there was such a harsh reality in March because all of the expectations, and you probably remember all the headlines, they were probably in automotive news, that prices were going to be up, remember 5, 15, I think someone said 20, hope you're not in this room, but a ridiculous amount of money, $20,000. And so people, understandably, I would imagine, would be quite concerned. So maybe the reality that they're facing now, that didn't happen, and you're seeing kind of a regular cycle, is giving them the indication that perhaps it is an okay time to buy because what the worst could happen in terms of buying a car didn't necessarily happen, and prices have skyrocketed $10,000, $15,000. So it's almost a relieving factor, I think, for the consumer.
I think what's interesting, though, is when you look at consumer sentiment, either in aggregate or specifically around vehicle buying sentiment, for example, in the University of Michigan survey, you would not expect to see the SAR running where it has been the past several months. So there's still this disconnect sort of between how consumers are feeling and what they're doing. So they may be rushing out to get, what they think are the last of the deals. They don't seem to be particularly happy about it.
With that demand that we're seeing right now and the strength that the market is holding up, how then is inventory? When they're looking for the vehicle that they want to take advantage of now because of what the market might look like in the future, what are they finding on the lot right now?
I think that situation has definitely improved. So there was a period during 2021, 2022, when we had to sort of shift from forecasting demand to forecasting supply, essentially. I think we're moving out of that era. Certainly there are still pockets, and I'm sure everybody's not finding exactly the perfectly equipped model that they're looking for when they go out into the dealer lots. But at least in our view of the data, it looks like things are, let's call it a new normal, but looking pretty normal.
But the strength in sales combined with some modest declines in production, we monitor what is actually showing up on dealer lots from a deliveries perspective, and we are seeing that down about 3% year to date now compared to where we were a year ago. So you're seeing inventory deliveries slow down, but yet sales are stronger. So we are seeing supply tighten a bit. It's nothing like it was back in 2021 or 2022, but it's created what I'll call this summer particularly a love roller coaster, because when you have strength in sales because interest rates come down or incentives are strong in 1 month like July, then supply is tighter in August and incentives dial down, and it has an impact on the market and the pace of activity that we see. But I think it's proof that there is a lot of pent-up demand, but the consumer is very selective and is really wanting to be convinced that this is a good time for me to purchase. And so I think you see ebbs and flows week to week, month to month as a result of that. And I believe we're going to be locked into that environment because this industry historically, until the pandemic, was consistently oversupplied. And very cyclical with too much capacity, and we're in a world where the facts point us to a likely supply constrained environment for the foreseeable future in both new and used. it should get a little bit better going forward, but it's not going to be crazy changes overall. And generally, that's probably much better for dealers in particular, because that environment creates more of an ability to defend the margins on the vehicles.
Just anything to add on that?
Well, I was just going to say too that, I mean, in terms of the consumer kind of coming to market at this point, they are, I wouldn't say they're necessarily super picky. I mean, of course, I think they're all looking for buying signals, which is really important. But in terms of like when we see consumer behavior through our site, for instance, they're sometimes easily changeable in terms of what they're looking for. Not necessarily like so many use of like filters, like I need to have this specific spec. It seems like people are more willing to kind of ebb and flow, especially after the past few years we had when supply was so incredibly tight. So it seems like there is definitely a willingness to kind of go and kind of seek out the best deal. It may not be your number one top choice. That's what you want, of course, but it does seem like consumers are perhaps a bit flexible, which is good, I think, for this environment that we're seeing right now.
From what you can tell, how is the U.S. in any way different from what you're seeing in other markets globally?
We generally look at the U.S., but I mean, I think I've told you guys already, I had a sabbatical, so I was off for 8 weeks this summer. So I went to a lot of different countries, and this is probably the first time in so long that you go to other places and you don't recognize a lot of the vehicles. They just look a lot different, and you would think that in some countries, BYD is the most popular vehicle brand on earth because they're everywhere. So I think what you're seeing here is it definitely feels like a departure from the rest of the world, which I imagine is a hard thing for automakers to deal with at this point in time of this market being different than others. But it definitely does.
I think at the macro level, we're seeing some of the same trends. Certainly the behavioral factors that Jonathan described in terms of consumers being sort of conditioned to say this might be the best deal. That sort of behavior does seem to be in place. And I would say, in Europe, for example, there is a bit of a similar trend where sales are doing better than you would think if you looked at all the macro indicators sort of in isolation.
Just make a note to the audience that we do have our Slido screen. Please feel free, any questions you have about the market for our panelists today, please feel free to submit them there, and we can definitely get to them throughout the conversation. So I want to turn to tariffs. It is unquestionably just a major change for the industry this year. Automakers have talked about absorbing billions of dollars in tariff costs. Some brands have mentioned dropping vehicles for the US market. Others have offered, incentives, employee pricing deals, really to kind of encourage consumers to consider buying in this point. There's a lot, I think, to the points that you made earlier, a lot of discussion about where prices were going to go, what availability was going to look like. Have we really begun to see, an impact on that yet here in the U.S.? Jonathan?
I think we're starting to see small glimpses of the impact, but it's been slow going so far. And part of that has been, look, while the tariffs were implemented at the beginning of April, we really had inventory that was unaffected. And so a lot of the data points like average transaction prices and what we've been seeing were reflective of it was really going to come with the model year shift. And now we're at about a quarter of what dealers have on their lots being model year 26. So we are seeing more of an acceleration in the increase in MSRP and invoice and average transaction price. But it's still well within what is normal for inflation as a new model year comes out, because we're only around 3% in that increase. And again, it sort of goes back to the consumer. I would argue that if you had perfect data, you would see that consumers were expecting 5% or more price increases when in reality we're only seeing 2 or 3. And it relates to that psychology that I was mentioning before. But don't get me wrong, we are all looking for these changes to come. There is, the number one rule of economics that I was taught in the very first economics class is there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And if the government is collecting $100 billion in revenue, give or take, from autos and parts, then that is going to impact prices and or the performance of the stakeholders in the business. So inevitably, that leads us to believe that there will be a cap on how large the market can be, contributing to what was already an affordability problem in the industry in terms of getting back to a 17 million or more kind of market being pushed well into the future. But the decisions that manufacturers are making, I mean, I've been saying all year long, it sucks to be a manufacturer. And it also this year sucks to be an economist. So Emily, it needs to get all of the drinks from everybody this evening, because I'm working on this analogy, but to me, it's like a multi-level chess game where you can't actually see the board and all of the chess boards are tilted in terms of the decisions that you need to make in the pieces if you're trying to play this game. So it's slow going, and as a result, I think it's making it a little bit easier for the consumer and for other stakeholders to navigate. We're not seeing crazy changes, and at the end of the day, the U.S. is a really important market, and I think it's absolutely telling that, with the exception of some EV decisions, we're really not seeing major announcements of that's it, I'm out of the market, or that's it, I'm out of this segment. And I think that's a testament to the likelihood that this is going to hold up.
Jonathan, I thought you were going to say the trend is your friend. That's the one that comes to my mind because of what you just described. I think we don't entirely understand the mechanisms that are going to get us there at this point because there is so much uncertainty, and I'm sure we'll come back to that on multiple other topics today. But there is a tendency for us to sort of find that middle. We found our way back to the mid to upper 16 million unit range. I don't think a lot of people thought we would be there at the beginning of the year, but these other adjustment factors, the margin absorption or whatever is keeping those tariff costs from passing through. Some of it is the fact that we don't know what the tariffs are going to be yet, as you alluded to, in the final reckoning. But I think generally speaking, a forecast that's not at either end of the extremes is probably the best chance of being right, even if you don't know maybe why it's going to be right.
Emily Kalinsky-Morris is chief economist at Ford. Jonathan Smoke is chief economist of Cox Automotive. And Jessica Caldwell is associate vice president and head of insights at Edmunds. They spoke with our own Lindsay Van Hully at Automotive News Congress this month in Detroit. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to Automotive News executive producer Jake Neer, as well as our own Michael Martinez for his reporting for today's podcast. We also had reporting from Kurt Nagel of our sibling publication, Crane's Detroit Business. You can get the latest news on U.S. sales results, supply chains, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Mike Murphy of the EV Politics Project about the state of EV demand as federal tax credits get set to expire this week.
If we do have a sales collapse in new EVs, which again, I'm not sure we will, but if we do, those plants are going to be running at low capacity. And we know in the auto business, if you got a plant running at low capacity, you shut down the plant.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.